So we still have 3 minutes to go, and then we'll start. So more and more people joining our session. We're now at 74 participants. And we're recording and we're live online. So I guess we can start now. So my name is Estermann. I'm joining you from Bern. I'm your facilitator for this session today. On my side, Xiaoli, she's having a look at the chat and also on Slack for all your questions and comments. And our special guests, obviously today, are Michelle Futornick. She manages the link data for production project and is the Sinopia product owner. She's based at Stanford University in California. And with her, Jeremy Nelson, who is a software engineer at Stanford University Libraries. His areas of focus are development of link data systems and applications of machine learning within the library. So we're having today a tutorial on how to use Sinopia to create any kind of linked data. To my knowledge, Sinopia is a link data editor. And Michelle and Jeremy asked me to ask you to use the chat now, all of you, and put down 1 or 2 things you would like to learn during today's session. So all our eyes are on the chat. We have now 99 participants, waiting just for the 100th. So don't be shy. Want to see 100 entries on that chat. So how to use Sinopia, how to work with Library of Congress subject headings in Link Data Editor. So Asaf is suggesting that many people here are looking for a general overview tutorial. Some people saying that they're complete beginners. The basics of Sinopia, what are its boundaries and how does this group find it to use? Mark, Library, Sinopia, how better how to better use Sinopia and going from Mark to Sinopia. Yeah, so there's a lot of people, I think, who would like to have a general intro, and some people seem to have already used it and would like to have some recommendations how to make better use of it. So I guess we have also people from various backgrounds. So Michelle, maybe you just go ahead and give us an overview of what you're planning to tell us during these 2 hours, or 1 hour and a half, actually.
Yes, 1 hour and a half. And what we've got planned is for my part, which is going to be about how to use the Sinopia interface to create templates, and I'll explain what that means. Will be about a half an hour, and you'll get to try some things hands-on. And then Jeremy is going to talk about programmatic ways to use the data that is created in Sinopia, also for a half an hour, and that should give us enough time at the end for questions and more demoing in response to your questions. So thank you, Whit, for all the things in the chat. And those are all really good questions that I cannot hope to answer in a half an hour, but I will be pointing you to other resources that should help answer some of those questions. So let me share my screen here. Okay, and I'll put a link to these slides in the chat so that you can follow along there if you need to. Okay, so this half of the presentation is going to be about how to create Sinopia templates, which is the basis of how Sinopia works. So I will show how Sinopia is used to create data and enter data really quickly, but this is more focused on how you configure Sinopia so that the data that's created matches what you're trying to achieve. Oops. Okay, so we'll do a quick, what is Sinopia? How do you create RDF in Sinopia from a template? We'll go behind the scenes of a template, and then I'll show you how to create a new template. And then tips for continuing on your own, because we won't be able to go through everything that you'll want to go through in this time. Let's see. Okay. So what is Sinopia? As we already said, it's a linked data editor. It was created by the Linked Data for Production project with the idea that people needed a tool to start creating RDF, but be able to do it without having to install anything locally or know sort of the guts of the tool. So it's a web-based tool, anyone can use it. And one of the really important things is that you might be wondering what the name is based on. So a Sinopia is an Italian word for a drawing that was done using this Sinopia pigment before a fresco was painted. So the idea is that Sinopia is not perfect, it's not complete, but it is a sketch of how a full-fledged linked data production environment could look. So that's what the name is. And Sinopia is a form-based editor. So that means all the work that's done is done through a form. And in Sinopia, we have templates. The templates are the instructions Sinopia uses to create the forms. So this workshop is based on teaching you how to create a template so that you can create a form. Now, Sinopia, while it was developed for libraries doing traditional cataloging, it can really support any kind of RDF with any ontology, any classes and properties. So you can make a form that does whatever you want, which is great because it's really flexible, but it also means that you could easily create some nonsensical RDF out of your form, and Sinopia won't stop you. It's not aware of the rules of your ontology. It's just set up to let you configure a form with whatever properties and classes that you want. Okay, so to show you the variety of what you can do with Sinopia, I'm going to first show you how the form gets filled in. So how someone describing an object or some other thing fills in a form to create RDF. And then that'll give you an idea of the varieties of things you can do in Sinopia. And then after that, we'll go into the configuration. So if you want to follow along during this part, you can. if you already have an account in Sinopia, these are the instructions for what you'll want to do, or you can just keep watching what I'm sharing. So I just put in the chat what you would need to do. And I'll be there in just a second. So what we're going to do is look at a sample template that I created. And thanks to the people that put in some of their use cases in the shared Google Doc in advance, because I used some of those classes and properties to make this little template. So I'll be able to demonstrate some of the features of Sinopia that way. So feel free to follow along. Before I switch over to the demo, I'm going to show you what I'm going to pretend to describe. This is a template for an art object. And I had in mind this art object, which is at the Xiaoli Glass Garden in Seattle, Washington. This is not a plant. It's actually, this tallest thing here is a sculpture made of glass. So we'll pretend we're describing that with this template here. So if you're following along, you would go to stage.sinopia.io, log in, click on Link Data Editor, then click on the Resource Templates tab and search for the template Demo 2. That's what I'm going to be using. And then click on that name to open it. So this is a form. And someone has created this form to narrow down the possibilities for describing this object. So you probably know, even if you are focused on a single ontology, there's so many ways that you could interpret the ontology. There's different content standards and controlled vocabularies you can use. And having a form like this really encourages consistency and best practices by narrowing down the types of things that you can describe. So a form just looks like a number of fields, and I'm going to be talking about the different types of fields that Sinopia has. So the first one, title, it's a free text field, which you can tell because you just click in it and you can start typing whatever you want. And I want to point out a couple things about this field. The asterisk here means it's required. So fields can be required or not, and Sinopia does enforce that you fill that out if it's required. And then this little arrow means that whoever created the template has given some guidance about what to do with this field. And the guidance is in the form of a link. So if I click this link, it would take me to information about how to fill in this field. And thank you, Ohio State University, for giving me this application profile to use as an example. So if you had external documentation related to your form, you could link to that there. And this field is not repeatable. So if I try to click in it again, I can't do anything else. All right, the next field, location. This one says enter a query. So this is actually using our partner's questioning authority service to look up to a controlled vocabulary. So whoever created this template configured in advance that for this field, I can only use certain terms from appropriate vocabularies. So I'm going to try to look up Seattle since that's where the sculpture is. And I can see that this is allowing me to search the thesaurus of geographic names, LC's geographic names, and Wikidata. So I could choose from any of those for my place. I'm going to choose Wikidata. And Sinopia will grab the URI of the thing I chose as well as the label. And in this field also, there's guidance behind this little I, which just means you click on it, it's just text as opposed to a link to external documentation. Now, while you're entering data, at any time you can go to this I, which is a preview. So I'm going to show kind of the RDF we've created so far. So these are the triples we've created. The subject right now is blank because we haven't saved our record. When we save this, Sinopia is going to mint a URI for the thing we're describing, and that will become the subject. The predicate is determined by the template, and I'll show you that later behind the scenes. And then here's some of the information that we've added. Like we said our title, was a sculpture. And here you can see it's using Dublin core property. And then our place, here's the URI we grabbed from Wikidata for Seattle. And that's a CDOC CRM property. So you can see you can combine different classes and properties according to your own needs. Now, and the thing that we're describing has a type of a man-made object here. That's determined by the template. We didn't enter that, but this template determines that. So what else can you do? You can also have a field that expects a URI. So here, my guidance tells me to go to writestatement.org and pick one of those statement URIs and enter it here. So if I try to enter something that's not a URI, Sinopia would warn me there. Now, this next field is if your data is not so flat. So you could have a flat list of fields, which works well in many circumstances, but other times you need to have what might be called a context node or ends up being a blank node. So in this case, I want to be able to say who made this thing and what technique they used. But there might be multiple people who worked on it, and each of them used different techniques. So if I just had a flat list of fields, even if they were repeatable, I wouldn't be able to associate which person used which technique. So this is actually like an embedded chunk of another template that's going to let me associate that information. So I could say that this sculpture was by Dale Chihuly. And again, this is a lookup field, and I can choose from LC or Wikidata. I'll do LC this time. And then the technique is also a lookup. I'm going to look up glass blowing, and this lookup goes only to the AAT and only to the activities hierarchy. So it's really restricted so that I can choose the right thing. So now let's look at what that looks like in a preview here. So here I said that this item has a production, and that links to a blank node, B1, and that this production has a person who did it and a technique that was used. So if I add another instance of production here, I can say that this other person, let's see, Mr. Glass, he was in charge of mounting. So now in my preview, you can see that there's another instance of production that was created with the second person and the second technique down here. I wonder where B1 went. Interesting. Okay, well, in any case, I want to also show you here, you can have repeatable values. So if I wanted to have some related web pages, I'm just making this up to show you that once you enter one thing, you can still enter more stuff. That's a repeatable field. And finally, fields can have default values. So here in the description, say I'm working on a project and I'm going to have a field where it always starts the same way. I can put in this information ahead of time, and then the person filling in the field can click edit and just add to that to save some typing or to enforce some kind of literal value that you always want to have there. So when you save now, Sinopia is going to mint a new URI for this thing. And now we can look back at the preview. Now you'll see the subject is filled in with that new URI, and here's all the statements that were created. Okay. So before we go behind the scenes of this, I want to ask if anyone has any questions about what I just showed there. Any downsides to blank nodes? Question for later. Yeah, let's talk about that later, but that's a really good question. Can you add custom vocabularies? That is also an excellent question. So I'm going to show in the help here is a special lookups help. And when you go to that, it's all about lookups in Sinopia, and it tells you how to request a new one. On here, requesting a new lookup source. So you can't really add your own yourself, but you can request that the questioning authority service add it, and then it'll be available. And I don't know why the blank node numbers were changing, but it doesn't really matter because the important part is just what the property is connected to the blank node, and then what the blank node's statements are. So as long as those match, it should be fine, but that's a good thing for us to investigate later. And
so
I'll yeah, thanks, Jeremy.
I can just jump in about that. So so underneath, we're using RDF serialization that regenerates and reserializes the graph every time you display it. So that's sort of an artifact of that module we're using, but it doesn't really change the semantic meaning of your graph. Really in the graph, as long as it's internally consistent, it's fine, especially for blank nodes. But that's, again, just sort of an artifact of the RDF serialization library we're using.
Thanks for explaining that. Another question is, can you add custom attributes? Not right now, but I'll show you at the end how you can request new Sinopia features, and we would love to hear the things that you want to use in Sinopia that aren't there now. And similarly, can you import a local model? I don't think so. Like, you would have to, in Jeremy's part, he'll show the API, and you could import a template, but it would have to already be in Sinopia's particular template speak. So yeah, we have talked about making Sinopia understand shackle or shex, but we haven't gotten there. So that would be another great thing to hear if you have a use case for that. Do you need to set a language default when putting together a template? So you notice what I didn't show here is that you can specify the language of the literals that you're entering, but we don't have a way right now to set a default for the entire template. So that could be another feature request. Can you provide your own URI? No, but that would be a great feature request also if you give us your use case. So actually right now I'll just show you how to make requests. Again, in the help, if you go to the Sinopia help site, then there's a thing on how to get help and to request a new feature. And it's a link to a feature request for you to fill out. And there's also other ways to ask questions here and get help. So thanks for all those great questions and ideas for features. Okay, I'm gonna now hop to the behind the scenes of the template to make sure that we'll have time to actually try to create a template together or on your own. So again, I won't go through all the nuances of template creation, but at help.sinopia.io, which is just a direct link to the same thing you would get off the help menu, where it says help site, there's extensive documentation on templates and all of the ins and outs. So please feel free to go there later, for more information. So let me go now. So this part, I'm just going to show you how things look behind the scenes, and then in the next part, you'll be able to get in there and try it yourself. So actually, let me show you. So I'm going to try to do this side by side here and show you both what we were just looking at when we filled things in, and then how that looks behind the scenes. Okay. I don't know if you're seeing, are you only seeing one? Let me do a new share here. Okay. You can see two windows now. On the left, I have what we just went through. This is the UI for creating RDF statements. And then on the right, I have what you're going to see is the guts of the template. So one thing about Sinopia is it uses the same UI patterns for entering data and for configuring a template. So that can be kind of confusing. They have different colors. The one on the right is more like the Sinopia color when you're actually configuring a template. And then when you're entering data, it's more this sandstone color. It's quite a subtle distinction. So it's one thing to look out for. So on the right, you're seeing the guts of the template. And every template has an ID, which is how it's uniquely identified. And it has a class. So whatever you are filling out in this form will have this class that I specified in advance. And it has a label, and it can have other metadata like an author and a description. But the real meat of it is down here in property templates. So every field that we looked at, like title, location, right statement, each field is considered a property template. So for each field, the template creator gets to specify what the property is, what the label is. So the label ends up right here in the field name. The property determines what the property is when the RDF statement is created. And then if they want to put help, the tooltip, that's called a remark. So here, this was a URL to be a link for the tooltip. And then here's where I would specify whether it was required or not. And the property type. So there's several different types, and this one was a literal. And that's the end of defining the title. Then we go down a little more. The next one was location. It had a different property. It had a remark that was just text versus a link. And instead of a literal field, it's a URI or lookup field. And since I want people to be able to do an actual lookup to a controlled vocabulary there, I had to say which controlled vocabularies. And you can see you can choose more than one. There's a drop down of all the vocabularies that are supported right now by Sinopia. And that's where you can choose which ones you want to offer there. Okay, and then right statement has a different property. And there's its help text. And it's also considered a type URI or lookup, but because I don't have any lookup vocabularies here, it's just going to be treated as expecting a URI. Now this one was the more complicated one where we had the blank node going on. So for this one, it's of type nested resource. And it's also repeatable, which is what allowed me to add two different statements or two different chunks about production. So if you have a nested resource, you have to nest something in there, which I do here. I'm allowed to look up any other template in Sinopia and nest it in. So of course that means you have to make the template in advance, or pause working on one template and you can open up another tab or another window and create the one you're going to nest. Finally, related web pages was a repeatable URI field, and then the description was a literal field and it had a default. So that was under literal attributes. So you see each property template or each field configuration has these possible attributes for literals, URIs, and lookups. And it's sort of up to you to remember which, or to know, okay, I'm making a literal field, therefore the literal attributes are relevant. Sinopia is not going to check. So you could, make a literal field and add lookup attributes and, things won't go well, but Sinopia won't warn you now, and maybe not later, but you will get unexpected results. Okay, so let me look at the chat right now. Actually, let me come back to that. And yes, we do not have homosaurus in the list of vocabularies. That would be an amazing addition. And you could use the help page there to make a request to QA to add that. So why are blank nodes needed? That is a good question. And the reason was, let's go back to the one that the thing that we cataloged earlier. Really quick here. Okay. It's because I wanted to, whoa, that got messed up. Okay, that's a good thing to look into. All right, theoretically, I wanted to say that there was 2 people that worked on this and they each had a different role. So I have to point to some object that holds the person and the role together, and that's the blank node. We don't make a URI for that because it's, well, we do have a, yeah, we don't, it's not something that needs to be addressed by itself with a URI. And I'm not sure why, when I go back to look at my record, it kind of mixed everything up. Mysterious. Or actually, that might have been one. Okay, here we go. I forgot that everyone was following along. So we all have made like, 100 records about this, which might have their own vagaries. So anyway, to say like this person, Dale Chihuly, used glass blowing, but this other person used mounting as the technique. A blank node is needed to associate those things. We can talk more about that later, but I want to make sure you have time to try things out. Oh, so someone said they requested Homosaurus to be added last year. Okay, so I'll definitely look into that after this, and we'll have to get back. Oh, thanks, Jeremy, for answering the other question in the chat. Okay, so now creating a new template. At this point, I'll create one and take suggestions from you all of what properties and classes to use, or you can go ahead on your own and start creating one, but I have to tell you first some very important disclaimers before you start. Okay, one is how to do it. So the way to do it is on the resource templates page to click on new template. But there's another way you could do it, which is to copy an existing template and then go from there. So say you wanted to copy the one we were just playing with, you would find it in the list of resource templates like before, but instead of clicking on the name to open it and put data in, you click on this copy icon. And then you'll get your own copy and you'll change the ID right away so that you have a new template. And one more disclaimer, important thing is Sinopia expects the ID of the template to have a colon in it. So to be like a URI style ID. So you need to put this colon in. You could just do it with one colon, like ABC colon DEF would be a legitimate ID, but Sinopia will not warn you. Like if you just put template ID, new template with no colon, it'll just save it fine, and then you won't be able to find it later. So be sure you have a colon in your template ID. And the other thing is for the date, it expects this particular format of year, month, day. And if you don't do that, then Sinopia will be upset, but it won't warn you. Okay, so those are the caveats if you want to try one on your own. Let me switch over here and go to resource templates and click new template. So we can try to make one together if anyone has some favorite properties and a favorite class that they would like this template to be about. I can show you really quickly how to add the basics and save it, and then what to do to go, see the form that it is creating. So I'm going to just call this demo template Monday. Anyone have a favorite class of thing that they would like to describe? And if you want to mess around with templates, Sinopia doesn't actually even care that this is a real class. So sometimes I'll just do stuff like make something up. It just cares that it's a URI. So if you want to just see like how the RIDF is going to turn out, you can put in whatever you want for a class. And the label here is required. That's why there's a star. So Cliff says scholarly article description. So we could say that's a scholarly article template. Now the author of the template, about the template, and the date are all optional. So I'm just going to skip those. I'm going to skip down to property templates and make my first field. So what should the first field be for our scholarly article? All right, article title. So I put that in the label. And then what is a property that connects the article to its title? So here you would put whatever your ontology is and your property. So I don't have one off the top of my head, but oh, Devlin core title. Okay, I don't even know what the full URL should be here, but we'll just put like, as a test. Thank you. And then we have to say what it is. So we're probably expecting people to put in a literal here. We would say that it's a literal. And then if we want there to be more than one title, we'd have to add here that it's repeatable. If we want to make sure that they put it in, we'd have to add that it's required. And then the only other thing that's relevant for a literal is if we wanted a default, which might not be appropriate for a title. So we could stop there with one field. And I'm going to do that just to show you like how to go back and forth between creating it and checking how it looks. Oh, thank you for that property. I'm just going to save this here. It asks you what group you want to put it in. And right now that doesn't matter too much because this is an experimental stage environment, but you could put it in other is the best place to put it. Okay, so now you have this beautiful template, demo template Monday, scholarly article template. And now you want to see how does this look when it's instantiated in a form? You go back to resource templates, and if you look for it, there it is. You can search by the label or by the ID. You could also search by who created it if we had put that in there, or the description if we had put that in there. And then you just click on it and you see your form that you created. Cool. And it's repeatable. And it's required. It has that star there. So now what usually happens is now you realize, oh, I meant to put a second field in. You can go back to this other tab where you're editing it. So notice this tab says the name of the template, and that's because I'm filling it out. This tab just says resource template, and that's where I am editing the configuration of the template. Can someone explain what class means? Yes, definitely. So let me go back to filling it out. So what class means is that the thing I'm describing with this template will have the class that I specified in the template. So this article, whatever this article is, it's going to have type of the class that I specified. I hope that explains it. If not, I could try explaining a different way. I just want to show you the iterative development. Okay, I'll come back, Karen, to explaining what that means. I want to make sure we have time for Jeremy's and for questions later. But when you work on your template, you can just go back and forth between looking at how the form looks, going back to the resource template. Oh, right. I need to add another field. Here, let's do one that's a lookup. Oh, we can do author. Thank you. Okay, so let me copy that. Okay, it's going to be author and whoops. What vocabulary should we use to look up authors? So I'm going to say, I want this to be a lookup. So I have to say it's field of type URI or lookup. And then under lookup attributes, that's where I'm going to say where we can look. So for author, might make sense to look in Library of Congress name authority. So I'm going to do Library of Congress, all names. And you could add a second one if you want there to be more than one lookup. Then you could add, you know, Wikidata or wherever else was appropriate here. Okay, so I'm going to save this just to show you something that you'll need to know when you're working on templates. So I saved it. Now I want to go back to where I was looking at it. It doesn't reflect the new thing I did yet. You need to go back. Actually, you need to just hard refresh, which I'm going to do with the shift refresh button here. And then you'll see the update. So remember, hard refresh is your friend. One other thing to show you quickly. Okay, so since I hard refreshed, it took away the other editing session of the configuration, but I'll just go back to resource templates, and I have this handy dandy most recently used. There's my scholarly article template. To go back to something you already made and work on it more, you use the pencil. So that's what I'm going to do. Go back, and then I realized, oh, I wanted the author field to go first. You have to use this little arrow, and you can reorder. So now author's coming first, and then article title. So it's a lot of back and forth to kind of get it to work how you want, but don't worry, because this is a stage environment. You can't mess anything up. Just play around and use the things on the help menu to ask for help. And I think I am just about at the time I said I would finish at. So maybe I can try to explain the class.
There are also questions. Oh. Yeah. The one about the classes, huh? Do we determine what classes exist, or is there a fixed set of official classes?
Yeah. No, so you are creating, let's see, you're creating a form because you want someone to use this form, or you're going to use this form to describe something. And when you use the form to describe something, so I'm using my scholarly article template form, and I have a title and an author. And don't worry about where you're saving it, really. Just look at it. Okay. So this is the RDF that's created, is saying this thing that I'm describing, it has this title and it has this author. And also, by the way, it has this class. So it's just like stating in advance that the thing you're describing is a certain class. That's the template creator is stating that. So the person who's filling it out isn't choosing. They're already knowing in advance. For instance, we have a lot of templates that have already been created by other people. So they're saying, this is a template for a cartographic work. Anything you describe with this will have this class here of a bib framework. I think I'm still not explaining it right, but the class means that everything described with that template will be of the class that is stated in the template. So it's not really set up for the person filling out the template to choose the class of the thing they're describing. It's more like, if you want to describe a map, use this, and it's going to be a map. If you want to describe an LP, use this other template. So there's no list of official classes. Like it can use any class from any ontology. Does Sinopia allow there to be more than one class for a thing? I mean, Sinopia would allow you to do that, but I don't know how you would specify that. You could add a field, I suppose. Yeah.
I think you could just add a field with the property of RDF type.
Yeah, right. If you wanted. Yeah, so Jackie, you're asking if the class is more like choosing the ontology to apply. I mean, it sort of is, but it doesn't restrict you in any way. Like you could have a template that's of class bib framework, but every single field with some other ontology. I mean, maybe that doesn't make sense in real life, but you could certainly do it in Sinopia. So it is flexible enough. And it is, thanks for the other question, it is open source. I just want to make sure Jeremy has time for his thing. So I want to say our last section was how to keep going.
Michelle, there was another question we skipped
Sorry.
a while ago.
Yeah.
Is there a way to express XML hierarchy in an XSD doc? It is. Can you use nested templates to do that? Thinking of a classification scheme. Question from Tim Knight.
I don't know. I don't quite understand. Maybe Jeremy, you can explain.
Well, so you could, I think, use nested templates to create what appears to be a hierarchy. But remember, if you're not familiar, so linked data is a graph, and it's not really a hierarchy. So you could probably model a hierarchy, but that would be how you sort of constructed your template to do that. But there's nothing inherently within a graph structure or a graph description that preserves that sort of hierarchical relationship. So I would say we could probably do it with nested templates, but Sinopia itself wouldn't enforce a hierarchy, for example.
Thanks, Jeremy. I want to stop now so Jeremy can do his part, but I will happy to answer more questions afterwards on Slack or in any of these channels that you'll find on help.sinopia.io. And I want to put in a plug for Thursday. During this conference, 12:30 p.m. Eastern, is the Profiles Affinity Group, which is a meeting of people that love creating templates, which used to be called profiles, but you could just think of it as the Application Profiles Affinity Group. So if you want to know more about templates in Sinopia, come to that meeting and keep asking questions. So I'll let Jeremy take over now.
All right. Thank you, Michelle. And I will share my screen. So before we get started, I am going to be demonstrating basically how do you interact with Sinopia's API using a Jupyter notebook. And I'm going to post in the chat here. The actual link to do that. And what will happen is just click on this link, and it's going to load this up, and then eventually you'll see a link to this particular API, any linked data, and click on that, and you'll open this Jupyter notebook as well. So you'll be able to actually run the code yourself within this Jupyter notebook, and it's I think a neat way to sort of combine your code along with your documentation in the Jupyter notebook. So what I'm going to be talking about is actually sort of the back-end Sinopia API. So everything you saw Michelle do in the editor, it contacts or it queries or posts or creates and using or sends requests to the back-end Sinopia API. API, in case you're unsure or what that means, is actually just short for Application Programming Interface. So it's just a way for one system, if you will, to talk to another and define some rules to be able to do that. Sinopia itself is running on Amazon's cloud, Amazon Web Services, and each of the API endpoints or each environment that we have. So we have actually 3 environments in Sinopia. We have development, we have stage, and then we have a production environment. Each one of those 3 environments also has a corresponding API endpoint. And all 3 environments are running the same code. We sort of set that up, and Michelle kind of explained why, is that this allows people to work on or experiment with Sinopia in either the development or stage environment without worrying that they're creating something that was going to end up in some production system. And then the intention is for our production environment for people to actually do production level cataloging in Sinopia. So far in the few years that Sinopia has been live and working, most of the activity has actually been accomplished in stage, but we do have a few thousand resources that are in production as well, and various institutions are using these different environments. There's also, so this presentation, just so people can see too, is also hosted on GitHub, and I'll post this link here as well. If you don't want to launch Binder, but you want to see sort of the content, that's there available as well. So the three different endpoints, and I'm going to run this cell here. So real quick, in a Jupyter Notebook, you have two types of cells. You have markdown or sort of documentation cells, and then you have code cells. And so you can kind of see the difference. The code cells have this slight gray background, and there I can actually enter in code. And if I hit the little run icon or do Shift Enter, it actually runs that code of whatever you put into to that cell. Now, we're using Python right here, the Python programming language, but there's other, you can run other different programming languages as well, but Python is primarily, or the primary language for notebooks. So the API itself has been specified in a format called OpenAPI, and what that specification does is really give you a sense of what functionality is available at that endpoint. And you can see, since all three our API endpoints are running on the same code, we just have one OpenAPI spec. And if you look here, if you click on this, this will tell you what authentication you need to use, and we'll talk about that, the authentication options later on. This sort of tells you how do you retrieve resources, how do you change resources, how do you create resources, and all these are sort of described here in this API spec. So if you're building a service and you want to talk directly to Sinopia's API and not necessarily use the editor, this is a critical resource that you'll use to build out your script or your code or what have you. So let's see. We'll be going back and forth to the spec as we're going through, as I was sort of demonstrating some of these things. But again, that is really a critical resource to refer to as you're sort of building out these sorts of options. So the API itself, just to give you a little bit of background on Sinopia, it is sort of a gateway to our backend storage, which uses a data source or a data store called MongoDB. And in the MongoDB, it stores everything using a variant of JSON. So JSON is a really sort of popular or really well used a way to sort of structure your data that's on the web. And in some ways, it's different enough, but if you're more familiar with like XML, it's just a different way to sort of structure your data. JSON is a little bit more flexible than XML, and it's not as verbose as XML can be. When resources are added to the MongoDB through the API, or if you go back and you edit and you change things, part of the backend service will notice that something has changed in MongoDB, and then we kick off a process that indexes then that resource into our Elasticsearch search index. So all the searching that you see in the editor is being driven by the Elasticsearch. So those are the two sort of backend systems that Sinopia uses to manage resources, as well as provide a search interface so that we can actually find things that you've maybe cataloged, or if someone else has cataloged and you want to bring up and look at. The first thing We're going to look a little bit more about the actual structure in MongoDB, but you can actually access any of the resources that you see in Sinopia through the API. And what will happen is that the API will query or retrieve the resource from MongoDB, and it'll just display it then in your web browser. You can access this either through your web browser, if you're comfortable with using a command line. curl is a popular open source program that's available that is present on most Unix-based systems, as well as Mac has curl available. In this presentation, we're going to be using a Python library called requests that will functions much the same way and allows us to query the API using some web verbs or web requests. Within the actual resource that you can that's available in the API, we have not only the linked data, in this case it serializes JSON linked data, we also have as part of that record some additional metadata. So I'm going to go ahead and open this example here, and this is from Stage. And so here is, so this is all JSON as you look at it. And here in this data property you see here, this is where the actual linked data or RDF is stored. Then if we kind of scroll down to the bottom, we have some additional metadata that we store along with the RDF or linked data. And so we have the user who created the resource, we have the group that it was created in, we have which template that was used to create it, and then we have some BibFrame specific optimizations where we store if it references different administrative data, items, instances, and works are just stored there as a convenience function for the editor. And then the last properties there are the ID, which is the same as the last part of the URL itself, and then the timestamp when this was created. And here I just kind of have what this sort of looks like as a screenshot. With one thing that's really cool with Jupyter Notebooks, you can actually run direct terminal or Unix commands through your browser. And so you can do that by prefacing your command with a exclamation mark. And so I just ran curl, and you can see here, that's the exact same presentation of this resource that you see in the web browser. And then finally, I'm going to show you how to do this sort of programmatically with Python using JSON to display it, and then request to retrieve it. So here, I'm saving as a variable Kernite result, and then I'm running the request with that URL. So then I'm going to display the result. So the result code of that. If you're familiar, if you've done any web browsing, you may have come across a web page that doesn't exist, and you see the dreaded 404 error. That's actually a status code that is returned back from the web browser. If the result is successful, you'll get a code that's in the 200s. If it's a redirect, it'll be in the 300s. And also, if you created a new one, it'll be a 201. But what we're going to do now, we're just going to display that code, and then I'm going to dump out the sort of serialization of that JSON so you can kind of see. So there, the result was a 200, so that was a success. And there you can see we have our JSON that we would expect from that result from retrieving that from the Stage API. And as I already sort of mentioned, we do have additional metadata that's associated, and that's also part of the result. So here I'm just going to go through the keys to show you all the different fields that we have. And so data is the property that contains the actual linked data, and then we have user group, template ID, and all these others, including the ID, URI, and timestamp. We can retrieve any of these values by using a function that you may have already seen before that's provided by the request library, and it's just, the method is .json. And then we can pass in between the brackets the actual property we're interested in. So if I run that, you can see it grabbed it from that request and just sort of printed out the ID, URI, timestamp in which group this particular resource was created. There's also, so now that we have sort of accessed the API, we can now do stuff with what's returned back from either of the 3 API endpoints. I'm going to import another RDF library called RDF-lib, which allows you to actually take the JSON link data and structured it and put it into actual RDF graph. So I'll go ahead and created a new graph. I parsed the data you can see here by putting in the data. And then I'm specifying that it's coming in as JSON LD. So we store everything in MongoDB as JSON link data or JSON LD. And then I just sort of displayed how many triples are in that particular graph. And we see there's actually 16 distinct statements that are part of the RDF for this graph. And another thing that's nice about the RDF library is that we can serialize it in a different RDF format. So JSON link data or XML can be a little bit hard to understand. Turtle is a serialization format for RDF that is a little bit friendlier for human consumption, if you will. So here, I'm just displaying it in Turtle. Here we see our resource, the type, the contributor, the date, description, and then we also have, because it's linked to these 2 different LC authority sources, Sinopia, we also store those just labels to help when we read this back into the editor itself. So that will be displayed that you see in the editor itself. Another thing we can do, since it's now in this RDF graph, is we can actually run Sparkle queries against our RDF. And so here I'm just running a quick RDF Sparkle query, and I'm just saying, grab the contributor who created this resource and the title of the resource, and then just print that out. So I'm going to run this. And there we see that the author is William, or Carl William, and the title is Kernite. So the actual vocabulary that this particular resource is Dublin Core. So again, even though we say that Sinopia is optimized for BibFrame, you can use any vocabulary you want, and it's all dependent, and it's all being really driven by how you've structured your template. So now that we have this API available, some people have some questions about, what about sort of batch operations? What if I want to do something or retrieve something on more than one resource? And the Sinopia API really allows and opens up those sorts of workflows. So here I'm going to show you how we can just retrieve multiple resources. The API, if we go back and look at it, if we go into the resources, you look under the get here. One of the parameters you can pass into the API is group and type. So we can construct our URL, we can request from the API all the resources that belong to a particular group. So I'm going to go ahead and do that in my notebook here. And there are a couple of other parameters you can use. So think about the problem if you have thousands of resources in a particular group. If you made a request to retrieve all of those at a single request, that could really bog down the system. And it also will take a while to do that. So to sort of handle that, we have a paging ability that will return a subset of those results. And it also provides you some additional properties that you can retrieve the next set in that bunch. So, and those are being really controlled by the limit, which defines how many per batch of records you want to retrieve. And then the start gives you sort of a counter to where to start. So initially, most of the time we start at 0. So if you go back and sort of look at the API. I think the default for our limit is 25. So if you don't even set a limit, a single call to the API will return 25 results at a time. And so if, let's say we had 100 results that are in a particular group or resources in a particular group, I would make 4 requests. The first request would have a start of 0, the second at 25, the third at 50, and the last one at 75. And that way, with those 4 requests, I'm able to retrieve 100 of those resources from the API itself. To be able to do that, now here's an example of grabbing all the resources for the music library, and this is sort of the URL that you would create. And I'm going to go ahead and run this. So now it's going out and retrieving the first 25 resources that are part of the MLA group. If we look at this, it also has a data and link. So conveniently, we also provide, instead of you trying to figure out what to set the limit and start, that is actually part of the results that get back. So you can programmatically pick up that next value, and your script can go then. And then if you have thousands, you don't have to do anything as long as you pick up that links and look in the links and grab the next. So I'm going to kind of show you what this sort of looks like. So here we have 25 resources, and in that links, you see there's the first URL, and then the next one is again sort of creates that for you, so you don't have to figure out and create that here. Because the MLA group has more than 25 resources, we would then be able to grab the second and this next property and grab that next URL to do that. If you kind of want to see what one of those records in that first 25, I'm going to just print out the 15th, so the 15th resource, and then these parameters are just to make the JSON look prettier when it's displayed. So if I run this, this is the 15th resource that's in that 25 record set. And MLA, they're using the perform music ontology. So this is yet another example of using a different ontology to do cataloging within Sinopia. So let me kind of scroll down. One thing that's nice, I don't want to do that, is over on the left here in your notebook, I can suppress the view of a particular field here. So that makes it a little bit easier to navigate your notebook. All right, so as you saw, I wasn't prompted for a password. I wasn't prompted for a username when I was retrieving any of these resources. So in Sinopia, in our API level, we don't do any security around read access. So we basically have universal read access to all the resources that are created in Sinopia. However, we don't want to just allow anybody to create resources. We want people to sign up through Sinopia, which a lot of you have already. And the API itself needs what's called a JWT or a JSON Web Token. And this is a really common security mechanism where on your browser side, when you log in, and in this case, in Sinopia, we're using a authentication and authorization service called Cognito, which is built in and available through AWS. And when you log in, part of what Cognito does is save and generate a JWT that then is stored in your local web browser. And then any subsequent requests, either to post, to create, or update, which is a put request, Sinopia requires you to have that token in the headers of your request. So there's a couple of ways to get at the JWT. From the Sinopia API, we have a command there that you can run. So you'd have to clone the Sinopia repository, API repository to your local machine. And then you're going to have to grab some of these parameters that are needed to do that, which includes the AWS profile, the Cognito user pool, and the domain, and then you pass those into your command, your authenticate command, and it'll prompt you for your username and password. And this will then generate a JWT that'll be on, then you can then use in subsequent interactions with the API. Unfortunately, some of those are sort of secret, so I'm not going to publish those or publish them, put them into the document here. If you really want to do this route, please email me and I can provide those to you sort of offline from this presentation. But I want to emphasize that there's another way you can actually get at your JWT. And in fact, what we're going to do is we're going to use the fact that if you've logged into Sinopia, that the JWT is now part of your local browser environment. So I'll show you how you can grab that browser-based JWT. So the first thing to do is to log in to Sinopia. And since I've already logged in here in Stage, close that. Then you'll want to open up your developer tools. So if I go here to more tools, you see web developer tools. And let me move this over here so we can actually see it. And in the developer tools here, you're going to want to click on the application. Let's see here. Sorry. Move this out of the way. So if I go back to my developer tools, and then if I click on storage, you'll see here we have cookies, IndexedDB, local storage. So we're going to open up local storage. You'll notice here there's Sinopia. That's on your left here. If you click on that, you can see that there's some values. And this right here, the second Cognito ID, is actually the JWT that we can use. So I'm going to go ahead and copy that. And then I can use that then, because that's a valid JWT, I can use this now programmatically to do things like adding in a new resource. And so I'm going to go back to my notebook. I'll go back to that. But here, I'm just going to go and delete that. Too much that time. So let me go here. That and paste in, and there's my new JWT that will all demonstrate a little bit later on. So, I'll be showing you how to programmatically create new resources within Sinopia, but I want to show first that there is a way, if you have arbitrary RDF, that you can use to import into Sinopia through the user interface, through the editor itself. So I went ahead and grabbed some of this RDF here, and I'm just going to copy this. And then I'm going to go into the editor itself and click on the link data editor. And you'll see there's this tab here for load RDF. Here, if I paste in, I can paste in the RDF, and it sort of prompts you for the base URL. So whatever you're trying to describe, in this case, it's Parable of the Sower by Olivia Butler. So I'll copy that, and that's the base URL. Then when you hit submit, this is going to prompt you to say what resource template do you want to use to try to import this in. And since you'll notice here, this is Wikidata and it uses schema.org, I can type in schema, and there's a schema.org book template that already exists, and I hit save. And it's going to try to load as much of the data that matches those properties as it can find. And you'll notice there are a couple of these that aren't defined in the template. And so you'll get this error message or this message that will show you which of these triples didn't have corresponding property. So what then sort of the workflow is that you go back to the template editor, add these properties in and try re-importing it into Sinopia. And then once it's there, I can go ahead and hit save, select the group I want to, and then hit save. And then that's now present through the editor itself to, now it's in Sinopia. So this just showed you some screenshots of exactly what I just showed you. Now, from that JWT, excuse me, from that JWT, we kind of look here, and we have to structure the HTTP post request, and we have to add in that JWT in the header. So here's the JWT I copied out of my web browser, and we want to put it into the authorization header. Now, the header itself has a structure, and it expects the bearer and then the actual space and the actual token itself. Now, this is a format string, so it's a special way that you can construct strings in Python. And you'll notice the lowercase f. All that does is saying it looks for this variable and it just adds it into the header itself. And because we're working with JSON, we need to tell the API what type of resource that we're dealing with. And in this case, we're dealing with JSON. So that's where this application /JSON exists. So I'm going to run that. Now, I'm going to show you an example of how we can take a RDF Wikidata entry for in this case, the 5th season by N.K. Jepson, the Broken Earth trilogy. We're going to construct our JSON link data, and then we're going to post it to Sinopia stage environment. So one thing what you need to do if you're going to create a brand new resource through the API is you need to create a URI. Now on the Sinopia editor, when you're creating a new resource, it automatically generates a unique ID and constructs the URL that is then posted. Because we don't have that, we have to do it ourselves. And in this case, I imported the UID library, and then just generated a random UID, and then again using this format string generated this new Sinopia stage URL for this. So if I actually print this out, you can kind of see Sinopia stage URL, and there is our new URI that we're going to mint when we post this. So I copied this link data from Wikidata. I went ahead and replaced the URI that's on Wikidata with our new Sinopia stage URL, you can see there. And but one thing that I did add, so this is, I adjusted the incoming RDF a little bit, is I wanted to retain the original Wikidata URL that this is generated from. And so I just did a schema same as triple here to associate it with this. And I'm setting it as a class as a schema book. And there are some labels here, a little bit of description. And then I'm also including, in this case, the author and specifying that as a person. What I could have done is I could have created a new Sinopia resource for N.K. Jepson and generated a URL and used that URL instead of this a little snippet of RDF. So I'm going ahead and I will run this. Then we're going to actually create, using that RDF library, the RDF graph. We're going to bind some of these namespaces, and then we're going to parse this turtle into our graph itself. So that's what all these lines do here. So there we sort of see our new RDF. Now, what we're going to do is go ahead and start constructing the request, the body of the request to send to the Sinopia API. So the data itself is in the data property. And you'll notice what I'm doing here is I'm taking the graph, I'm serializing it as JSON LD, and then I'm decoding it. So the serialization format, RDFlib, returns back a binary format, and we need it to be in Unicode. And that's what this decode method called here is, just turns it from binary to Unicode. Then the user is myself, just my initials, JP Nelson. And then the group, I'm going to save it again to the other group. So I'm going to run that. Now here is where the real sort of work is being accomplished. So I'm using the requests library. I'm doing a post request. So a post is to create something, is a HTTP verb to create something. I'm sending in the Sinopia stage URL I just created. Then I'm passing in the data. And then finally, you'll notice I'm passing in the headers, and the headers includes that authentication token. Now, fingers crossed, if I did everything right, when I run this and display the status code, so you see what a 401 means that I'm not authorized. So when I copied that JWT over, I must have not copied it all the way. So we go back here, just make sure that I didn't do something really dumb. So I'm going to try to do this again. Go back to my developer tools. And let's see if I can't make sure I get all this. So start from the beginning. Okay. Okay, copy. All right. So I resave that. Now let's try this again. So go back here. Okay. So the 201 status codes means that now has been created successfully, and the API returned back the 201. If we go up now and I click on this, so it didn't serialize it great, but we can see there's our actual data, my user, a group, the ID, and the timestamp. So we successfully created this resource in Sinopia in the stage environment, and it's now available if we wanted to load it up through the editor. Let's see. Now the question is, what about batch loading? So since this is a trilogy, I thought, well, why don't we grab the two other books in the Broken Earth trilogy, and let's try to do a loop and go ahead and create two new resources for the second book, which is titled Obelisk Gate. And then the last one is the Stone Sky. So here we're just creating the URL. Here is the link data that I grabbed from Wikidata. And then basically the same thing with the Stone Sky. We have our new URI as well as our turtle. Now I'm just going to run that. So now we've saved those into those variables. Now here's where I have a for loop. So you'll notice we're passing in a Python list here. The first member of this list is what's called a Python tuple. So it's just basically a two-element data structure that has our URI that we created, and then our URI, and this is a mistake, that should be TTL. So this is the URI, and this is the link data for each of those two resources. So we're going to go through this loop 2 times because there's 2 elements in our list. We're going to create our graph. We're going to parse it. We're going to generate the body, and then we're going to post it. So now, if everything works correctly, we posted and we're able to create both of those resources. So you can imagine, let's say I have thousands of resources that I may want to import into Sinopia. You could use this this technique, and it doesn't have to be Python. It could be another programming language of your choice, to do sort of batch operations by adding all these resources into Sinopia. The sort of the next step is now that we're sort of demonstrate how do you create stuff, what happens if I want to go back and edit things? Well, if we go back to our API, so let's see where I have this. You notice here on the left, there's the different verbs. And so we did get, and then we also did a post. Now the put verb or HTTP verb allows us to update an existing resource. And so we can see it requires the ID and sort of the response. And then, so the idea here is I may want to change either something in the graph, maybe I missed something, or I want to add some new triples or change some triples. So that's what, so we're just going to go through really quickly how you would do that. So the structure of the put request, we're going to use the same header. We still need a valid JWT. So this is our header. So that's still okay. Then what we sort of realized is we didn't fill in the template ID in terms of the metadata, or most of our resources in Sinopia have a triple that's stored in the RDF itself that specifies which resource template was used to create it. So we're going to go ahead and do that here. So here's an example for the 5th season, the original graph. I'm going to go and extract it. I'm going to add in our new template ID. I'm going to parse it. We're going to add this triple. So this is before I do that, let me make sure that I'm using the right URI since it is random. So I'm going to copy this. Here, and so first thing I'm going to do is actually go out and retrieve the old one. Then here in this triple, I want to use our new URI. And here, this put request, let's just go ahead and use our Sinopia stage URL that we've defined. So we're going to add the triple. We're going to serialize it and replace the existing data. So that'll be our new graph. Then we're going to do a put. We're going to first put to this, our stage URL, our data that we've dumped on our existing body and our headers. And then we're going to just, again, see what the status code is for that. Let's see, what do we want? Oh, I had an extra quotation mark. Thank you. Invalid syntax. Let's see. Oh, and I'm missing. There we go. So now let's try this. And we sort of published, and there's our result that returned back. File not found. So I have to go back, and the returned RDF needs to be adjusted to reflect that new URI. I'm not going to do that, but hopefully that sort of just illustrates how you would update existing resources in Sinopia. And then here's sort of, again, using the same idea of adding this additional triple in and just using this for loop to sort of do that. And I'm just, because I don't want to risk failing again, I'm not actually going to run this loop, but that's sort of idea that you'd be able to do a batch edit job using the Sinopia API to do that.
So Jeremy, apparently there was sorry for interrupting, there was an extra single quote apparently somewhere at the end.
Yeah.
And we have just 5 minutes left until the official end of the sessions. So I don't know whether maybe you want to ask the audience whether there's some urgent questions. Otherwise, Michelle has already announced that there's a possibility also to ask further questions on the Slack channel. So if anybody has a question left, like from all these plans you had, what you like, these intentions, what you wanted to learn during this session, there's an extra 5 minutes. We can use that to address anything that you would spontaneously post now.
I know there were some questions we didn't answer fully, so we'll follow up on the Slack channel. We'll use the tools channel in the Slack workspace.
And I'll just offer, if you're interested in using the API, sort of in how I demonstrated today, you run into problems, please feel free. You can email me directly at jpnelson@stanford.edu, and I'd be happy to help you do that.
So I guess people now have to go and try it out before asking further questions. So how is the API versioned? Response headers? You're muted, Jeremy.
So the API itself is a Node.js project, and it is versioned there in sort of the package JSON. I don't think we're returning in the response headers which version we're using, but that's certainly we can add to that and add that extra header. But it is versioned in the code base.
So I guess that was it. So I'd like to thank the audience for your attention, for the many questions. I'd like to thank Jeremy and Michelle for this excellent introduction into Sinopia, and more than just an introduction, I guess. Jeremy brought us deep into the workings of the API. And I think some folks here, they're eager to try it out.
Thanks, Beat and Xiaoli, for moderating.
Yeah,
Thanks everyone for being here.
All right. Thanks.
So see you around. So I guess we'll stop the recording now.